I'm Tom Abrahamson, and I'm co-presenting today's session, which is called Re-enrollment, the mother of all untapped opportunities, or another version is the mother of all ignored and untapped opportunities. And I sit here with about 40 years of experience. About 15 of those were working in 3 different universities. My last role as the enrollment manager of DePaul in Chicago. And then I left to join a marketing firm that specializes in higher ed and nonprofits. And we work with hundreds of colleges and universities. My specialty is enrollment management. So I'm gonna turn over to Jeff Jones right now to say hi.
Hello, everyone. And as Tom mentioned, Jeff Jones. I retired in 2020 as Vice Provost at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, where, among other things, I ran our Direct Connect to UCF program, which is the largest transfer receiving institution in the country. For the benefit of my University of Wisconsin regional campus friends, before that, I was at 2 different Big Ten universities on regional campuses. First most recently at Indiana University South Bend, a campus of about 8,500 students at the time, where I was the Chief Enrollment and Student Affairs Officer. And prior to that, I was at Purdue University North Central, again, a regional campus similar to the University of Wisconsin systems. I'm an adult student myself. I returned to school and got my initial college degree at age 29 after having stopped out, and went on to get a master's degree and a PhD as an adult student, always with part-time study and full-time work at the universities I served. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Okay, so let's get rolling. One thing I'll mention is both Jeff and I, we go back a long way. We've worked together as a client of mine at the firm, and we've been friends. And both of us are into a lot of different things right now in what we call our rewirement. One of the things that I'm very involved in is a business called My Footpath, which is, I'll talk a lot about re-enrollment and re-engagement today. And this is a business that focuses specifically on this. One thing I want to do before we get started is everyone turn on your camera for a minute. I want to do a quick poll, and I want you to raise your hand if you already believe that re-engagement and re-enrollment is the mother of all ignored and untapped opportunities. How many of you are, before the session even begins, how many of you believe that? Any shows of hands? I got 1 or 2. I'm not quite sure. I see a lot of cameras are turned off.
Lindsay, I like that. We can work on that.
All right. Well, let's see what we can do to share what we know and think about this. And then we're going to have some time, of course, during the session for questions or comments. And you can use the chat. There's at one point, I'm going to just ask you to chime on in. So let me share my screen with you in the presentation. Okay. To get it back to the beginning, I guess. Hold on. You know, this always happens, doesn't it? All right. So first of all, I'm going to refer to this as re just because we're probably going to say re-engagement and re-enrollment 1,000 times. We're going to talk about why this now. We're also going to talk about what the opportunity is for students to get re-engaged with and get re-enrolled, or some of them re-enrolled for the first time. There are about 50 million of them in the United States. I'll get into this in a little more detail, how we got to the 50 million. But you will hear us talk about the people who didn't complete a degree but started college, and the people that I refer to as the nuns, and I don't mean the Catholic sisters nuns. I mean people who actually applied, were admitted to a college, and didn't go there or anywhere ever. I want to talk a little bit about why this has been largely ignored on campuses, certainly for the entirety of my career as an enrollment manager and also as a marketer and marketing consultant, working with enrollment growth and turnarounds and all that sort of thing. And then we'll talk a little bit about, should you do this? And if you do, how do you do it? What's the best way to go about it? So I always, thought about enrollment and enrollment management early in the career was really all about just recruiting students, new first-time students. Then I guess later on, a little bit more interested in transfers, and transfers sort of came out of the realm of the registrar's office and more into the enrollment marketing and enrollment service area. And of course, retention has always been a thought, but not really a direct responsibility of enrollment management and enrollment managers. But there's a third leg of this stool that I believe has never really been there, which is the idea of re-enrollment. If a student leaves, and a lot of them do, whose job is it to get them interested, getting them re-engaged and re-enrolled, and figuring out what it's going to take to do that? The illustration here of a leaky bucket, higher ed is a very leaky bucket. It always has been. There's legitimate reasons why it is, and there's a lot of self-inflicted reasons at institutions why it is. But the solution has usually been just keep filling that bucket with more new students and it'll be okay. Well, on the left side of the chart of the slide, you've all been hearing about the enrollment cliff, and it's real. The fact that our birth rate has fallen to a 32-year low, and those students are going to be percolating through our system for undergraduates, for graduates, et cetera. And that's real. Higher ed lost a lot of enrollment, about 6%. I believe it was last year or in the last 2 years. I can't remember if it's 2 years combined. And then in this particular point in time, although internationals are starting to come back with COVID, that plummeted. But also some other things interesting happened. We all went online. We all got ourselves geared up for online learning. It's not to say it was a full service approach or an optimal approach, but nonetheless, almost every institution instantly got familiar with how to provide online learning. And if you look at who's winning and who's not winning, in last year, 70% of all colleges declined in enrollment. Among those 30% who did have some growth, 70% of them were for profit. So all the students we're going to be talking about today, my thesis is that the only people who are finding them and talking to them are the for-profit institutions. And of course, there are some really good ones, and there's also some shady ones. But the kinds of things they're doing are the kinds of things that we all and you all need to be doing, in my view. So you've got to grow or at least stabilize your enrollment. What do you have at your disposal? What tools do you have? Well, can we lower the tuition? I don't think so. Can we raise our discount rate? Maybe some can, but that's a pretty unusual situation. I talked about international. Can we grow graduate? If there's any truism, I believe that graduate enrollment does have a correlation to employment and unemployment. And I think right now, with the unemployment being quite low, graduate enrollment doesn't seem to be a great opportunity for those who need to retool, career change, et cetera. Can we increase our market share? Essentially, it's always been a zero-sum game among institutions. It's, if you look at your state of Wisconsin, as I've done before, and look at every institution in the state, add up the total of all the students that attend all the public institutions in the state, for example, you can see that market share shifts and changes between institutions, but not that much. So the idea of taking someone else's market share is a possible but difficult. And then how do we get students from out of state? How do we broaden the geographic footprint? Can be done, but usually only through destination draw programs that no other institutions have in that person's market far away, or through heavy discounting through scholarships. So here are a few that I think are left. Increasing online offerings is maybe a possibility. Improving your retention is always a possibility, and I think colleges have gotten much, much better at this. And then re-engaging and re-enrolling. I guess I'd open it up to anyone. If I just turn on your mic, any other things that you see as tools available to stabilize or grow enrollment at your institution? Don't be shy. I don't hear anybody. Anyone want to put anything in the chat?
Maybe new programs.
New programs, great idea. Yep. Anybody else? Incentivize student progress. Corinne, can you talk about that a sec?
Sure. What I'm trying to get at is the difference between retention, retaining a student, and moving a student through the program, where
Okay.
they're moving more and more quickly, if you will, or steadily toward progress. And then
Mhm.
they become a, not only a model of student progress, but, a possible referral mechanism as they succeed in the program and don't stay for an inordinate amount of time.
Good point. And Lori Wedig, excuse me if I messed up your name, suggests tweaking programs or making sure current programs are up to date and aligned with employer needs. So give a little bit more thought to that. Of course, in this session, we're going to focus on the mother of all untapped and ignored opportunities, which is re-engagement, re-enrollment. So let's talk a little bit about who are these people. Well, I can assume that almost all of you are familiar with the National Student Clearinghouse. This is an amazing resource. I believe they have almost 100% of all colleges in the US regularly report their enrollment to the clearinghouse and have been doing so for, I think, 29 years. I've seen under the hood because clearinghouse was a client of my former firm, and I know what kind of power they have in that data. If you look yourself up in the Student Clearinghouse, you will see every single course you've ever taken, every semester you've ever taken in college, and how many credit hours at every college you've ever attended, undergraduate, graduate, professional, medical, etc. And it will say whether you completed the degree or not. And all you need to do is submit your records of the institution with the first name, last name, and date of birth, and they will send you back a huge list that shows all the information on all those students and what their attainment was. The 14 million, so the Student Clearinghouse has been doing a lot of PR, and they've been talking about the fact that about 36 million students in their database never completed a degree. There's also these students who I'm quite familiar with who actually apply and are admitted and don't go anywhere. And with students in underrepresented and low income groups, it can be up to 40% of a new student class actually get that far but don't make it. So I'm saying that we have about 50 million to work with. So when I talk to colleagues at institutions, we talk about re-engagement and re-enrollment, and stop-outs are the one group that everybody seems to be aware of and think about. Typically, there are students who just left. They're presumably out there and maybe going to come back. They're not people that you've kicked out necessarily. And they can enter as freshmen, transfers, and even master's students. By the way, I want to say one other thing about, well, wait a minute on this one. So then there's your students who are dismissed for academic or financial reasons. You may think about some kind of amnesty for them. A lot of schools are doing this. If you've been gone 20 years, what have you done in your life to remediate yourself, if you will, and even with financial holds and things like that, a number of institutions are looking at their policies. I work with some places that would put a hold on a student and prohibit them from registering and drop them like a stone if they owed a parking ticket. In some places, it's a couple $100s. So this is something internal. You also have students who got a degree at your institution or another, but they never pursued a graduate. You have the nuns, who are these freshmen transfer and graduate admits. And I'll tell a little story. One of our clients at Lipman Hearn, when I ran that company, was a major public university system. They had a centralized graduate school. So even though there were many, many campuses, and it's just like about the second largest system in the country, they had all their graduate students came through one of the campuses. So they get 60,000 admitted graduate students a year. And so they wanted to grow the graduate program, and we kind of walked in and started talking to people and said, well, what do you think of those 60,000? The great majority of them don't come here. So what happens to them? Well, everyone knew that answer. The answer is they went elsewhere and they went to a better school than ours. So we said, you know what, just for the hell of it, let's take your admitted graduate students for 1 year, 60,000, run them up against the National Student Clearinghouse and see how many of them did not go to any college at all. Okay. Put in chat, what percentage of them do you think did not go to any graduate program at all of the 60,000? There's going to be a prize for the one who gets it. Here's a chat. Okay, what do we got? 45%, 82%, 84%, you know your business. 80% of them did not go to any graduate program at all, okay? So you're left with 48,000 students to work with. This is a good example of a myth and reality that kind of drives the decision and the mindset about, about re-engagement, re-enrollment. There are other ways you can look at students. You have continued ed students, you have certificate students, and you can even go up funnel more. If you have a form where people say they're interested, they actually complete a form for inquiring, or you track someone who might have visited the campus, they demonstrated their interest, they made themselves known, but they never applied, they never were admitted. If you have records on them, you can throw them up against Clearinghouse and find out who never completed college, never went to college, or never got a master's. Anybody have any other populations that could fit into this re-engagement, re-enrollment? If you do, throw them in the chat and I'll just mention them later. So why has this idea of re-enrollment, re-engagement been ignored and been untapped? And I will say, first of all, that I've worked with lots and lots of institutions on this topic. And there's an analogy. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit. It's called grammar school dating, okay? Everyone says they're doing it. Some actually are, and those who are don't know what they're doing, okay? Essentially, I think one issue is, and I'd be curious to hear from others, that I think a lot of institutions, a lot of people, they say, well, we are doing that already, and I'll get into that later. Another reason is that outsiders and insiders often judge the institution's reputation and the institution's health by new freshman metrics. It's only recently that some of the big data gatherers started even paying attention to transfers. There's still no 10-year graduation rates. There's still no continuation rates as measures. It's all 4, 5, 6 year retention of freshmen. Rankings are heavy on that. Even bond raters like Moody's, they look at these things and they determine your bond borrowing ability. Another issue is that it's unlikely that anybody owns these students once they leave the institution. And when I say owning, I mean stay after them, work with them. In my experience, having overseen registrar's office and financial aid and parts of advising, the registrar is probably the closest to ownership, and they're wonderful people, but they're not recruiters, they're not incentivized to enroll. Then there's a lot of myths and understandings about why students don't enroll in the first place and why they leave, and that's a whole nother presentation, but Jeff is going to get into that a little bit too. FERPA was a new thing during my time as an enrollment manager, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And essentially, it shifted the control and the access away from the parents to the student. So legally, colleges used to operate under in loco parentis, which is they legally had parental rights. So a parent could call and find out the grades, talk to anybody they wanted. When FERPA went into play in the institutions that I worked at, so many people applauded. They're like, thank God we don't have to deal with parents anymore. And if a student stumbles, let them stumble. Figuring out how to work through our maze is part of the learning process. You know, that's their thing. They're adults. They're on their own. I think that's changing a bit, not in terms of the law, but absolutely so in terms of paying way more attention to students and their needs, et cetera. And then finally, if this has just never been on the radar, I did a master's in higher ed administration. Re-enrollment never came up as a topic. It's not being trained or talked about now, that I know of. So what is standing in the way of re? Well, I'd say 80% of it is the institution's own policies, and it's not having the awareness and the funding and the staffing and the verve and the drive and the interest in getting those students back. They're gone, they're gone. Some other policies. Oh, I have a raised hand. Katie, talk to us. I saw Katie raised her hand. Okay, we'll hold up. There are some places where you can't, your credits expire. That I cannot tell you how many institutions I have worked with. Sorry about this. That have posted on their website the application deadline for fall of 2022 is January 15th, 2021. Okay. So you talk to the folks and they'll say, well, no, yeah, but that's, we'll take someone all the way up to August 15th of 2022. No problem. But, people believe you. They're rules followers. They trust you. If your deadline is January 15th, it's January 15th. So that is something that you may even have somewhere buried that you don't even know about. I mentioned the financial holds. I've also worked with institutions that have really brutal collection agencies and that sort of thing after students when they owe a certain amount of money, and they're highly incentivized, as you know, to get that money and to do it, whatever it takes, call in the middle of the night. Another would be not having the kind of in-demand and online degrees people want. And that was commented on before as one of the tools. A third point would be that, why do we have fall and spring semester? Because fall is harvest and spring is planting. And this is how most institutions still operate. Not online institutions, not aggressive with it institutions when it comes to adult students. They're starting all the time. 5, 10, 15, 20 starts a year. Your access to data. A lot of you have switched major database systems over the years. Sometimes that data is destroyed or locked away, so hard to get to. It's hard to go back, and you have to go back 20 years, 15 years to do this right. And then in terms of updating, there are services for name and address, or updating address through the U.S. Post Office Service, email appends, all that sort of thing. There's very little of that happening in the higher ed world. And then we talked a little bit about budgeting. I'll say some more of that. And then a lot of the students that are out there that are stopped out are in that horrible place of no degree, paying off student loans, or trying to pay off student loans with a high school diploma or a year of college or two, and they can't get those jobs that will pay enough to be able to pay those loans. So they're either barely hanging on, or they are in default, and they don't know there are ways out of this either. And then Jeff's going to say much more about the complexity of student lives that stands in the way of getting back in college. So after the presentation, this whole presentation is available to you. And there's 2 links in 2 slides. The one at the top is the entire roundtable that I worked with in my Footpath, the company that I'm involved in as a consultant and investor, organized. That's the whole 1 hour roundtable, and it's really good. The participants were Bob Scott, sorry about this, who was the president of Hofstra Emeritus. He was also president of a major national higher ed association. He was president of a public university. This is Adam, can you see my arrow? The moderator of the session. Jeff Jones, who you're going to hear from today, was on that roundtable. Don Hostler, who I believe is the leading expert in the world on enrollment management. He's written 23 books on the topic, and was a professor at Indiana University, ran their research, ran University of Southern California's research, and he was also vice chancellor for enrollment management at Indiana University. And then Mike Sexton, who's been enrollment manager at 3 different institutions and is one of the preeminent trainers of enrollment management. And then Malik Brown, who runs a unique in the country nonprofit called Graduate Philadelphia, which works strictly with re-enrollment of students in Philadelphia and in collaboration with all the colleges in Philadelphia. So I have a clip. Unfortunately, you can't see the video, but you should be able to hear this from Don Hostler on staffing and budget strategy. Might need to turn up your volume a little bit.
This is a strategy for both presidents and for CFOs. Never ask for base funding. Always ask for one-time dollars. Make pitches around the one-time dollars for return on investment. And that leads into why it's often easier, at least to get started, to bring in a group to work with you than to start it yourself. CFOs and presidents get nervous about adding a lot of staff that start to look like permanent salary commitments.
Don, I think that's a really good point. And another way to frame it is to talk about points of leverage. We want to accomplish this according to our strategic plan. Here's a point of leverage for helping us get there. And that's your one-time funding to get things started.
We can't hire enough people and ramp them up soon enough. Plus we end up, nobody likes to let people go. And that's not even cold-hearted CFOs like to let people go. So one-time funding, and often seek support groups to work with consultants so that you're not initially saying, I want to spend all this money and I want to hire all these people, but rather, here's a 3-year plan. We're going to do it for 3 years only. We're going to evaluate it rigorously, and in order to do it in that time frame, we have to get started away with people who know what they're doing.
Who doesn't love a good pilot program, right?
Okay, I hope you're able to hear that. My computer was going haywire during that. Can somebody in chat tell me?
I heard it fine. I heard it fine, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so that concludes, I'm sorry. I also have one other clip from that round table that I skipped over. And this is from Mike Sexton.
Again, just to be devil's advocate here, what about the idea that, if somebody went to a restaurant and didn't have a good experience, why should that restaurant try to get them back? Because maybe they don't like the food, it's not the right location, the price point isn't right for them. So is that part of the mentality on campus as well? Hey, they tried it, it wasn't for them. Wouldn't it be better to go after a new customer, a new 17-year-old, than trying to change a 30-year-old's mindset?
It's got to be both and. You can't just switch one for the other. Look at the other operation on the campus that brings in revenue, the development office. They have an army of people that will deal with friends of the college, alumni, donors, may have given a gift once, and they stopped. They don't let them go. They go after them again and again. And there's a certain equivalencies that make a lot of sense. When you think about the staffing, the salary structure, this is an age-old argument that admissions people have about development is overvalued or admissions is undervalued. But because they see the rationale, the metrics will show that they can get them back. Well, I think we need to try the same thing. Who's going to do it?
Okay. So that concludes my presentation. And let me just go back. Okay. Jeff, are you ready to go? I'm going to bring up the
I sure am.
presentation and let me see if I can get it right. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions or comments of anything we've talked about so far, please post them in the chat and we'll get to them. Okay. All right.
I need the slides, Tom.
Is it sharing?
No.
Hang on. I think I'll figure this out in a second. How are we doing now?
Yes.
Okay, just tell me when to switch.
Okay, will do. Thank you again very much for having us today. You know, my part of this is going to be what happens to inform us about these students who have stopped out previously or were nuns, never showed up. What do we know about them and what are we going to do to make things better for them this time around? Now what? You certainly want to protect and maximize your investment by persistence, retention, and graduation boosts. To go out and spend money and effort, certainly, on trying to re-enroll or re-engage with students and then letting them fall right back into the same environment they were in before is probably not money or effort well spent. And we all know, I think, that it's always or generally more efficient to retain and serve a student that we already have rather than to go out and recruit another student. So persistence is absolutely optimal. Why didn't these students complete the first time? You know, we've got a list of reasons. It could have been academic performance. It could have been financial difficulties, social discomfort from the standpoint that many people just didn't fit in very well to the campus environment. They've got a different option now with online learning, some positive and some very negative aspects of that, I think, but nonetheless, it's a different sort of environment. Lack of family support. Through my career, I've heard stories from students themselves who said, you know, my family doesn't really understand my quest for this degree. They really want me to stay home, work, try to bring home some more money and do the things that are necessary to keep the family going. Loss of personal motivation is key. We all understand, again, from psychology itself, that, you know, you don't really motivate anyone to do anything. What you do is try to assist them in harnessing their own personal motivation to go forward. And another aspect is, and this is increasing on our campuses, is health. Not only physical health, but emotional and mental health. If you look at the latest data on things like students who are seeking treatment and or counseling at our health services, at our psych services, and so forth, we understand that there is certainly a preponderance of complexities in our students' lives. Next slide, please, Tom. Additional opportunities, and we know this, dependent care. I've been at campuses that added and in some cases subtracted childcare, but we're in a sandwich generation where students frequently have to not only take care of their own children, but also their parents. Very difficult assignment. Transportation issues. Again, there's a ton of stories out there. I'm sure we've all heard them. Food and housing insecurity is one that I think has really come to light over the last 5 years or so in my world. I can tell you that we have some local community colleges here in Orlando that have polled their students and found that 15 or 20% of them, in some cases, have food and housing insecurity. They're couch surfing, they're going to food pantries, and this is not it's pervasive across socio-demographic groups in some ways. Employment opportunities or demands, you know, in today's world, and I'm hearing this more and more from students that I'm dealing with now that are saying, you know, I can't get enough time away from employment to go to school and do it justice. Employers are demanding more time because of the unemployment and their lack of available workers. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, of course, is opportunities, which is one of the driving motivators for many of our students, but you know, it's difficult to overcome. Systems failures. What have we done? Not only the institution, but also the other types of institutions that we have to deal with, like federal financial aid. Tom mentioned very eloquently a little while ago about looking at financial holds. We did the same thing at the University of Central Florida, and it was unbelievable how many students owed less than $100 and were on registration holds. When we tallied all that up and the money we spent on trying to retain and help those students persist, it was a drop in the bucket. We raised that up to about $500, and guess what? We cleared something like 80% of our financial holds, thereby allowing students to re-register in a timely fashion rather than worrying about cleaning up these $200 bills for any variety of reasons. And it's absolutely amazing the impact that we had. And yet we all understand that at the end of the line, these students are going to still have to pay off the institution in order to get their transcripts released and other things. So it's really not, I mean, it's just shooting yourself in the foot to try to put these financial holds on people. And any number of additional reasons that we all could quote. I'm sure we've all got a bunch of stories about that. Tom, next slide, please. Knowledge is power. The more we understand and know about these people, the better job we will be able to do to retain and keep them around or re-enroll them in general. These students are not the students typically that left. There's something that has occurred in their lives that causes them to come back. Maybe we as enrollment people are the ones that triggered that action, but many of them are not the same people that we saw or didn't see the last time around. They've matured, they've gotten more, maybe a little bit more desperate about their straits, their lack of available employability. And so something has changed that is going to help them this time. And then ask questions of students. You know, if you, exit interviews are fine, and I believe in exit interviews, but I do know that many times students will find an easy answer just to satisfy that quest for knowledge. I can tell you there was a study that I read probably 25 or 30 years ago that stuck with me. And that is, it was by an academic advisor that said, you know, no student has ever told me that they dropped out because of substance abuse, that they were drinking too much, or they were staying up too late on the weekends, you know, and partying. They always said, well, it's because I couldn't afford to come back. It was financial reasons. So there's a lot of hidden reasons out there. And the more you know these students, the more you're able to speak with them directly as individuals, the better information you're going to get. And then mine your data, like Tom mentioned earlier. We have sophisticated student information systems. We have a lot of ways to manage the data we have. How often do we go back and really look at these folks and say, how many people had 60 or more credit hours when they dropped out? How many people were on financial holds? You know, that's where we get this knowledge. So asking people, why didn't you finish before? Can you roll back for a minute, Tom, please? You know, what caused you to drop last time or stop out or not enroll? Then try to attack those root causes. If it's childcare, try to help the student understand and access appropriate childcare. Give them the resources for them to do this own job. I'm going to talk about coaching in a minute. Why have you chosen to return to higher education? What is your why? One of the things I've learned about adult students is if you can determine what that why is. I'm here because I need a better job. I'm here because I have advancement opportunities in my current job. I'm here because I feel like I've got a job that's been undone. I feel like I want to be a better role model for my children. These are important whys, because when the going gets tough, when these students get in a bind and they're really struggling with how they're going to get things done, reminding them of that why is a really significant way to empower them to keep going. And how do we best assist you in reaching your educational goals? And that involves a process where students do have to identify their educational goals, which is a good step forward. Next slide, please. Again, why have they chosen to return? I've covered a few of these things. They've gotten some family support they didn't have before. I've had an overwhelming number of students through my 36-year career in higher ed that told me they're doing it in some ways for their children. I've had parents that are going lockstep with their children through colleges in order to get that degree at the same time. They've been so close and they've always felt like they didn't quite get the job done. And this is a very powerful why. And that feeling of accomplishment is important. Next slide, please, Tom. You know, we've got an ongoing debate, I guess, and I've been involved in some very heated debates about this, and that's the difference between coaching and advising. And as Tom said earlier, I think he used the grammar school dating example. There's a lot of people that say they're coaching students, and when it comes right down to it, I don't think they are. They're doing academic advising in a pretty traditional way, which is, you know, how do you get students to courses when they need them? How do you help them navigate other systems? But generally, it's through accessing that information and presenting it to the students. Coaching is really designed to empower students to be able to figure out how to navigate very complex organizations. And personally, I feel it's a life skill. It's not going to get any less complicated after they graduate from college. We understand that organizational life is becoming complicated, in part because of all the technology that mediates these activities. But by providing students with those resources while reminding them of their why is really, I think, the way to do it, and that's coaching. And finally, building meaningful relationships with students is critical. Again, it's been in the literature for years that, you know, any relationship with a caring adult for students, and in adult students, I will maintain it's just as important that they have a relationship with a professor or an academic coach or someone at the institution. And this goes down right to the people who are working in the residence halls, you know, maybe even cleaning the rooms. If they develop a relationship with somebody that holds them a little bit accountable for what's going on, it's a powerful way to complete. Let's move, please, Tom. The results, I think, are clear. You know, you've got to improve student outcomes. Students will stick around. You'll see your graduation rates climb, your retention rates. Again, as Tom pointed out, many of our metrics are definitely geared towards you know, the full-time, first-time freshman student who comes in and we all report to iPads and move on. The fact of the matter is more and more states are looking at transfer rates. More and more states are looking at ultimately numbers of degrees awarded. I can tell you in the state of Florida, we do have a metric that's how many degrees do we award. They don't care if it's 8 years or 20 years. If that student gets a degree, it's a plus in your column. Social gains, obviously, economic development, health, and generational change continue to be critical factors. Institutional partnerships, connecting completers and employers. There was someone mentioned the ability to add programs and change programs that are responsive to employer needs is absolutely a key to showing adult students that there's a payoff at the end of this completion. Their local employers are looking for people with this background. And finally, increased personal wealth and satisfaction. Folks, it's all about social mobility. It's all about lifting lives and livelihoods. More and more people are measuring social impact. That is, how much did you improve the lives of the students you're serving? And it's becoming a key metric. Next slide, Tom. And let's get down to what many of us have to consider, and that is the success of our institutions. We all know that there are many fragile institutions right now. We've seen many Tom pointed out earlier, I think the data is 6.5% enrollment decrease over the last 2 years. Many community colleges are down 10, 12, 15% this fall alone. There is an existential angle to this, and that is that there are going to be a lot of institutions that are no longer serving their students going forward unless they can increase their enrollment, find new ways of tackling this financial challenge that we have. Lifetime affinity, as been pointed out, our development offices consider these people alumni, even if they've stopped out, and the quest begins to ask them for money. Well, I can tell you that if they have indeed completed that degree and they've benefited from the things that you've helped them with, and they're now, they have an affinity to the university that far surpasses that of a stop out, and they are hopefully going to continue to support you. You have support by your local employers and grantors that are interested in trying to increase the numbers of students in your communities, the number of graduates with college degrees. You can look at this as a lifetime engagement. There's an interesting little bit of a movement right now where people are beginning to talk about subscriptions to institutions, where you really do buy a lifetime subscription to the services of that university, so you can continue to come back, take courses. You can continue to take continuing education courses. You can retool as needed. You can attend events. You can do a lot of other things to keep people connected to university. And finally, as Tom pointed out, no one likes to walk around with no degree and student debt and all of the other accompanying challenges that presents. You know, how to turn unsatisfied non-completers who are probably not singing the praises of your institution, particularly if you ask them to leave for any variety of reasons, and turn those people into evangelists for your institution. Because I can tell you, in my working with adult students, if you help them get from point A to point Z, and you can show them the path to completion, they become quite supportive of your institution. And that's a critical function going forward. Tom, slide, and you're muted. And you're muted, Tom.
All right, yes.
There you
So
go.
in my fumbling around with those videos that only did the audio, but when you look at the afterwards, you'll find them. You can see the videos as well. I missed a slide and it's an important one. I just want to close with this and then open up to comments. So should you invest in re-engagement, re-enrollment? Let me just throw out a few thoughts. First of all, it kind of depends on the size and type of institution. The bigger the institution and the higher the attrition, the more people you'll have to work with to re-enroll. Very small institutions that don't have either have high graduation rates or just don't have high volume, it's going to be somewhat of a numbers game. But on the other hand, you can go up that funnel and you can use the clearinghouse and you can look at all the students who were admitted that didn't enroll at your place, for example. And it may be as many as 80% of all your admitted students didn't go to your school. Those are your built-in fantastic transfer prospect lists, and you can use them for that. And the same for inquirers. You could also partner with some like institutions, and if you want to get sophisticated, even share revenue. If the person might have been at the other institution in your consortium or system, started there, but they came to you, maybe you can give them a percentage of the tuition share, because it's going to take some work to share records and things like that. The third point is kind of gets back to that analogy of we're already doing it. These institutional obstacles and so on, they're very real, and you have to be able to check those egos at the door, and you have to be able to say, okay, look, we can't have a 4-week backlog on advising appointments for a student who wants to get re-enrolled. We have to figure out a way to serve them immediately, within hours, confronting those systems. The other thing that I hear a lot is, we're already doing it. Well, what are we doing? Well, we're sending an email or maybe 2 of them to a student who's been out for 3 semesters, and we're saying, come back. Well, that is not going to cut it. If you have an admission staff of 5 people or 10 people or 50 people, you need that many people to do this and do it right. You need to talk about paralleling what you're doing for new student enrollment with a re-enrollment, re-engagement effort, and you need to optimize your budget accordingly. And also in to the point of Dr. Hostler, set it up so that it's based on an investment with a return on investment and real numbers that are good estimates, the best you can do, that with money attached to it in gross and net revenue, and be ready to commit to that and give it a shot and give it 3 years. So the last point is that this is a conversation that is picking up faster than anything I've ever seen, because all enrollment managers, all officers, all presidents know about the cliff. They know about the enrollment declines. They're under horrendous pressure. And so you're starting to hear more about schools taking action, doing things. The Chronicle of Higher Ed, for example, is just about to release a book on re-enrollment and re-engagement. And it's something that I say, if you're going to do it, the time is now, because you could get left in the dust with others in your competitor set, working with many of those same students that you will be working with. All right, so at this point, I'd like to just stop sharing my screen. We have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to just hear from folks. If you can, just turn on your camera and your audio and share some thoughts about what we talked about today, or things you might be doing on your campus, or anything related. Hi, Deborah.
Deborah?
Hi. Very interested in the financial block and causing students to kind of time out. We actually had a program here where there was incentives for them to come back and actually waive the back debt for them to come back and get started. And we really kind of had a roadblock. We weren't able, I mean, I know it was during the pandemic and things like that, but to re-engage students. So any thoughts, or as we're moving forward, we'd like to continue that and kind of come on board and help them with a plan so that we can relieve debt and get them back on board to a lucrative career, but how best to do that and actually engage them in coming back.
Jeff, you want to take that? And I have a comment.
Yeah, my first thought, Deborah, is, it sounds a little wiggly, but I would probably have to learn more about, what the different aspects of that are. I mean, were you forgiving holds? Were you forgiving, or you were incentivizing them through free courses or discounts, or those are aspects of it that I think are, but one thing I took out of what you just said is the word COVID, right? So, I don't think any of us can really predict what happened and what the implications are. To some degree, it may have just been timing. In other words, you're trying to incentivize them at a time when it's down the list a little bit as far as priorities. And I think we have seen that, and hopefully we've come out through the back end of some of that. So what I would tell you is I would keep trying, and I would let timing perhaps correct itself. If you offered that same thing this coming year, you might find a whole different experience. But I also wouldn't, do it without re-examining the details, or even asking a few people. Maybe a few people did take advantage of that. Ask them what moved them, and ask some other people who did not take advantage of it. Maybe it was just timing. But I do know one thing: people are working, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, adult students. And a lot of employers are just simply, they have a feeling of responsibility for their employers. And it's very difficult right now. But I think, these things shall pass. So I think that I would keep going. I maybe would tweak it, but I wouldn't give up because it was an unusual year. This was the black swan event of our lifetimes, perhaps.
Yeah, let's hope.
In education. I mean, it just disrupted everything. And I think the implications are going to be felt for some time, including in the K-12 world. But I say keep trying. I think it's a great idea.
We will, I promise.
Yeah, so I'll give 2 examples of the way to approach it. First of all, nobody on a campus likes the idea of forgiving debt, or erasing debt. I'm currently immediate past chair of a board of trustees of a university. When I was board chair during COVID, that was a hell of an adventure. We established an emergency fund to do this sort of thing, and we raised $1 million among our trustees and our alumni. So it was other people's money. It wasn't the university's money. It wasn't just erasing a debt. And another was when in my marketing firm, one of our universities, we created a program and pitched it to the foundation, and they had some dollars they could allocate. And we called it Touched by an Angel. It's a little corny, but we basically identified a few hundred students that had X amount of debt, and we figured out what it would cost to make them whole and also give them the extra money to fill the gap they needed to graduate per student. And we asked the foundation to give money to them and the student to sign a non-binding contract that said when they're in a position later in life to give back to another student, that they'll do the same. And about 120 students instantly re-enrolled. So there's, I think other people's money helps defray the issue of on campus. Other thoughts, other questions? Someone's in chat.
Yeah.
What recommendations, okay. Someone said they offered a scholarship, 500, you can read your chats, $500 scholarship, and then recommendations on keeping updated contact for students who left. I will tell you, there's something called the National Change of Address Service, NCOA. So if anyone moves physically, they register with the post office every 6 months. That address is updated for forwarding, and it's dirt cheap. And there's also a number of sophisticated email appends that you can do with third parties. Anybody out there have any recommendations on specific services? I know one is called Peachtree Atlanta. That's the National Change of Address. Other questions or comments?
Tom, if I could say a couple things. You had also just brought up, partnering with other institutions. You were able to mention a little bit earlier, I'm also working with a company now that I'm retired called Quotely Inc. And it's a course sharing platform, software as a service, that allows groups of institutions, including consortia, to do course sharing, to do student sharing, to do revenue sharing, and even to aggregate financial aid among various institutions. If you today are not the ultimate answer for students, try to form these partnerships and these consortia. I recently wrote a blog about the age of collaboration, and I truly believe we're there. I don't think that institutions are going to be able to stand as in a silo. You're going to have to look for your partners and build situations where, the cliche win-win. If both partners can come out with some advantage, then it's a fruitful partnership. And I really think you should look around and see what some of the other folks are doing that you could partner with.
Yeah, to do this takes a champion. And if any one of you on this Zoom, think this is something you want to do at your institution, you need to do, it's just waiting for somebody to take the leadership. And I would just personally offer it. I bet I'm going to offer Jeff too, that you've got our emails. If you need any advice, coaching, someone to talk to about how to get it going, do not hesitate. Both of us, we're doing the things at our stage of career in life that we're catching up on some business that we didn't attend to in the past, some things that we've learned. And in my case, I feel like all these years I've been doing this, I've completely ignored and missed something that I should have been paying attention to, which is why I'm excited about evangelizing re-engagement and re-enrollment. But I would like to just offer up at any time, if you want to bounce some ideas off of me or Jeff, you got our emails in the presentation, please do so.
Yeah, emails on the front page. I want to chime in with Tom, and then we'll call that our final comments. For those of you, and just looking across, I'm going to say some of you are probably early to mid-career professionals. I can tell you that this is a great way to build a niche. In all my years of being a chief enrollment officer and other things at institutions, I rarely have said to a person who's come forward with an idea and says, "Hey, just let me work on it for a while. Let me see what I can come up with." I've never said, "Boy, that's not a very good idea." It's usually going to be, "Hey, I'd love to see you take a little run at this." If you can come into some of your institutions with 12, 15, 20 students that were unidentified in the past, and you can say, "Look at the results of my little campaign," you're likely to get some more resources to devote to that. And again, as Tom has said, and others, it's a return on investment scenario. If you can say, give me this and I'll give you that, the resources will follow. And, so I would really say for some of you that wants to kind of cut a niche, this is a great area to concentrate in. And I think you can show results that are going to, really impress your bosses or your next boss as well.
Okay, so we are at 4:30 and we're done. You have the presentations. There's also a case study that's been attached, I believe, to this of a re-engagement, re-enrollment campaign that's brought in more than 1,000 students in the last 2 years at Northern Arizona University. So we're going to stop here and thank you all for taking part in this with us. Wish you the best. Have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.